The recording's commenced, Murray.
Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce Robert Holmes to you today. I was actually very fortunate to go to a New South Wales ICF event this week, which Robert was a co-presenter on, and it was fascinating, so I think we're in for an interesting time today. Robert is the co-founder and CEO of Fraser Holmes Coaching, which is one of Australia's largest coaching companies, and they work across Australia, New Zealand, and a number of overseas locations like Joburg and London and Vancouver and so on. He's an expert in the science of human behaviour. He's a research fellow at the Neuro Coaching Institute. He's currently studying a PhD in neurocoaching. He's an accredited mental coach and a member of the Coaching Psychology Interest Group. Robert, he's got a postgraduate diploma in accounting. He's got a PhD in theology, Bachelor of Commerce, advanced certificate in business facilitation. Look, he's got a very broad career that spanned from coaching, business consulting, teaching, training, pastoring, public performance, journalism, authoring, and so on. So he's very varied. He's got a very interesting topic coming up. So I'm delighted to welcome now Robert Holmes.
Thanks, guys. And in the background, Brenda and Murray, thank you for your assistance with the technical difficulties. Murray's going to run the slides and I'm going to speak to them. And hopefully we'll handle questions along the way properly as well. So, and I'll also try and catch up the lost few minutes at the front end. So just a quick summary on the content of the presentation. We're going to look at the foundation for performance. So Murray, if you can flick that over the next slide. We're going to look at the foundation for performance. So how does the unconscious mind work? How do autopilot programs work? And then we'll discuss rapport between conscious and unconscious, which turned up in our seminar this week in Sydney, and how learning occurs. And once we have that foundation in place, we'll look at the three model methods for how to change state from low performance to high performance, which is one of my passions. We've also attempted to create some handouts and things that you can obtain at the end of the seminar, and Brenda will guide you to where to get those so that you can download them for yourself and remember later. One of the things I'm going to give you is going to work instantly. One will kind of be a state intervention, when you're in the middle of something going on, and another one takes a bit of a run-up with your client to teach them some of the foundational principles behind state management so that they can, turn up and get ready. Ding. Next slide. The state management material has a lot of possible applications. We're talking about building high performance for individuals, and that happens in all areas of human endeavour. So I'm not going to apologise for the fact that sports and athletics have really been at the forefront of learning about human performance, but it now has applications in business, industry, education, parenting, all sorts of other areas, and they work perfectly well and just the same. So what we're going to learn today can be used with our clients for them doing job interviews, confrontation, managing stress, maintaining high function in a narrow focused job like, high risk work with cranes and building and so forth, and any form of competition actually. All right, next slide. So Murray, just want to ask the audience now, and hopefully you can type into your question box there. Just wanted to know what your expectations were. So I'd love for you to use the message function and just quickly talk to us about what your expectations for the next hour are. And while we're waiting for that, we might just flick over to this excellent quote by Jamin Fraser that says, and this is really what we're getting down to here in this seminar, if you can control your state, you can control your outcomes, because state is king. So change the state and change the ability to see what outcomes you can get. So just looking for any comments or questions there. On my screen I can't see any, but Murray or Brenda?
I've got some comments coming through, Rob. Karen is learning something new to apply to her practice. Getting leaders unstuck is another great comment. Different ways to challenge and engage high-performing clients is a great comment from Andrea. And useful tools and curious questions. And last comment I've
Beautiful.
just seen here is fresh thinking, particularly linking coaching skills for HP, NLP and neuroscience.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I'll keep all of those in mind. I'm pretty sure we'll cover the majority of that material, so that's great. All right, so let's flick over to the next slide and just have a little bit of a look at the baseline for state, which is the condition that you're in. So the state that you're in is basically made up of the condition that you're in and how the whole being is running and being run from all of the machinery that's sitting underneath. Now, the surprise for some of us might be that the large majority of our state is running on autopilot. So David Eagleman, who put in about 20 years of research into unconscious programming, found that, or he puts the figure as high as 97%. So in his book Incognito, he makes the outrageous claim that only 3% of our being and our state is a conscious thinking, which puts 97% of it below the water. Now, Freud was the one who invented the term unconscious, and it's turned out, although his theory was untestable about the id and the ego, the superego and the unconscious and the preconscious, none of it was really testable in a scientific manner. His hunch about the way human beings worked was pretty good, although I disagree with all his everything is about sex conclusions. Let's just turn that over to the next slide. According to Benjamin Kisson, who wrote an excellent book, although I don't suggest you try and read it because it is quite boring, his book Conscious and Unconscious Programs in the Brain, Benjamin estimates that we have about 10,000 automatic pilot programs. Everything from lifting a glass to your lips, to shaking hands when somebody smiles at you, to how to walk, how to talk, how to swim, all of those programs. You think about how much of that has become unconscious. So it's sitting down there. It's an automatic or a routine or a habitual or familiar handling of the most common problems that we get. We look out into the world and we see a red light and we stop, or we see yummy brown kind of chocolatey food and we want to eat it. Most of that is just running completely on autopilot. So how did they get there? If you think about childhood, they began with us not knowing how to do something, and then we consciously walked with, learned and ran with a program, say walking or drinking or eating. And as we learned it, we automated it and then sank it into the unconscious where it ran pretty well. But if you didn't get the programming right, if you didn't put it in correctly, it could have gone in there with bugs, it could have gone in there with problems. Later in life, you might not want some of those programs. You might want to improve them, or you might want to delete some. For example, when I went sea kayaking with my son, I needed to learn to become ambidextrous. Otherwise, our kayak was going to go in circles, long, big circles, but still. We have a child living in our home at the moment who's a foster care child who has been systematically taught to use the word them instead of those. So she says, "Can I have them biscuits?" And it is a lot of hard work to teach her to say, "Can I have those biscuits?" But you can do it. You can change it and upgrade it. All right, let's flick that over. If any of you track or watch the podcast or mini-series Smarter Every Day, you'll see in episode 133 the author of that program or podcast, Destin Sandlin, who is, I think, an astrophysicist by trade, learning to ride a bike whose handlebars have been programmed backwards. So when you turn left, the bike turns right, and when you turn right, the bike turns left. It took him 8 months to learn how to ride that bike. It took his 5-year-old kid about 3 weeks. So if you want to see something hilarious, go YouTube Destin Sandlin episode 133 and watch this guy fall off the bike for ages. If you can just flick that over again, Murray, another great example will be if any of you have been a Top Gear fans and have seen Richard Hammond, again, go to YouTube and type in Richard Hammond Formula One car, and you'll see, now this guy drives extremely high-performance automotive vehicles at very high speeds, a Bugatti Veyron, for example. So he's at the top end of the driving spectrum, but when he went to drive a Formula One car, they put him in a Formula Ford, and then a Formula Renault, and then a Formula 400, and then a Formula One, and he was terrible. He wrecked it, and they were really scared that he'd break the $1 million engine. So the process is not that easy once it becomes embedded, and there's a 4-stage process. As I mentioned with learning in childhood, you are unconsciously incompetent. You don't realize you're incompetent. Then you become consciously incompetent because you try to learn this new skill. Then you become consciously competent, so by the end of the day, Richard could change gears into 3rd gear. And ultimately, if you keep driving that Formula 1 car, you become unconsciously competent. So it goes down into the programming. Let's flick that over again. The main issue with state management for your clients is to get coherence between the two systems, the 3% and the 97%. This psychological coherence usually is just normal, but if you go into a high-performance sport or a high-risk environment or a high-stakes environment, the emotional system starts really messing with the cognitive system, and the agreement frame is poor, and you can make some really bad decisions. Like, for example, I was under stress. I got off the plane here in Melbourne and I jumped into the taxi and I said, take me to RMIT campus where I have a lecture, and he drove me to the city. And I never once for a minute thought RMIT had 4 campuses and that I needed to be somewhere completely different. So the two are not framing. There were signals there for me to watch, a discomfort, a kind of sick feeling, a kind of awkwardness, and I just thought, oh, I'm nervous. But no, there were signals there that I wasn't listening to. I have a client who raced the Superbike series, but he kept, these bikes here on the screen, and he kept crashing. He was a really gun-hot rider, but he kept crashing the bike. And as time went on, and we talked and worked through unconscious signaling and unsafe signaling, he worked on it, and he ended up 37th in the league. And then as he continued to work on it without us, he went from 37th to 3rd. So last year he finished 3rd in the Superbike series, all because he was trying to listen and learn to an unconscious signal of when overtaking was unsafe, which he'd been ignoring up until that time. We have other clients from Canberra who've ended up podium winners in elite cycling, and CEOs who've climbed the ranks from CIO to COO to CEO, all because they're learning to control their state, particularly under stress when they're trying to talk in front of other people. All right, let's flick that over again, thanks. So the underlying issue then is building rapport with self. And Freud believed that you did this by paying attention to your dreams, which certainly is one way, but it's not going to be a very high speed kind of a technology for you to use with your clients necessarily, unless you're familiar with dream interpretation. So modern neuroscience now says pay attention to all of the signals. Pay attention to your physical signals, your emotional signals, your mental signals, and anything else that just feels like a vibe. You know, we talk about women having a 5th sense or being able to pick up stuff, or 6th sense. Can you pay attention to the signals that you're getting in your body? So, for example, I had a client who was a marathon runner who was not listening to a signal that he was getting in his foot. And the foot was trying to tell him, listen, your training regime is out of order. So he'd be running too far, he'd be running without enough sugar, he'd be doing all sorts of wrong things. And the signal was in his foot. And when he realized that and started paying attention to the foot, it would say, don't go running today. And he wouldn't. You can go running today. Now, pull up now. You've gone too far, turn around. So he started playing with this conscious unconscious signaling, and in the end was able to A, get rid of sciatica, which was just a symptom of his unconscious, B, get rid of his screaming sore left foot, which was also a signal of his unconscious, and C, he was able to podium in the Townsville Marathon, which was really good. He came 8th in another marathon inland, all because he started listening to his foot. Now, I know that sounds a bit crazy, but we're just talking about unconscious signaling and how to build rapport and conversation with that. Let's just flick over. I've got a picture here of a lady with an out of order signal on her forehead, because I have a client, a business client, who has been crying for 30 years, and in her own words, for no reason, right? Nothing is for no reason. She would cry for no reason in the middle of a meeting, a staff meeting, in front of a boss, in front of investors, when she was going home. something was going on. Now, she tried antidepressant medication, she tried psychotherapy, she had hypnotherapy, none of it worked. And ultimately, when we sat across from one another, and my business partner, Jamin, we said, are you listening? Are you listening to your unconscious signals? And so she started to, and suddenly pop, up came some reasons out of her childhood and her relationship with her father and issues to do with her business. So we explored those, not from a psychological point of view, but from a point of view of why is your unconscious offended and why haven't you dealt with that? What's going on? Let's talk about it. So it was her dad who was part of her business setup, and it goes back to when she was 7, and this lady's 47. So here's an issue that she needs to start resolving, and does, and it reconciles her relationship with her business partners and reconciles her relationship with her father, which is still in process. Guess what? The crying goes away. All right, let's have the next slide. Let's just say, for example, we have a client who doesn't have such a dramatic issue as crying in front of everybody, but maybe they just don't like confrontation. Their autonomic nervous system programs are firing off nervousness, inappropriate laughter, shaking hands, and kind of a sickness, I mean to vomit, every time that he has to do confrontation. So I'm sure that you have a client who's similar to that, or you've heard of someone who's like that. This approach to state management would say he needs to change his state to change his outcomes. And the only way to get to the state is to get to the unconscious signaling. They're all signals telling him he's terribly uncomfortable, but what do they mean and how can he change his behaviour? So I have 3 main approaches that I'm going to take you through, from the quickest to the strongest. So let's have a look at them one by one. Let's flick the slide over there. State management model number 1 is what I'll call the jump to state model. It's absolutely possible to instantly change your client's state, or for your client to change their own state. So next time a child throws a tantrum or comes in crying or what have you, just ask them to look at the ceiling and smile while they tell you what's wrong. And you see if that tantrum doesn't evaporate. Because it's impossible for them to be angry and upset and crying while they're looking up and while they're smiling. So you just ask them to do it physically, and the external processes in their body will change their internal state. And when that happens, they'll start to communicate with you normally. Instant state change happens all the time. So, you know, when you're with your partner and you're feeling amorous and you're sort of thinking tonight could be a good night, that can turn cold very suddenly when your partner starts discussing the neighbours or the finances or cleaning the toilets, or, I mean, I'm sure it's happened to you, right? So you get this instant state change and you just roll over and go to sleep because they have taken away or removed your state in an instant. So what my coaching mentor says, Ian Snape, says, can you imagine the right state that you need for great mentoring or great coaching right now, or great running, or great, whatever it is you're working with? Can you imagine what that state is? Yes. Can you access that state right now? Yes. Great. Can you stay in that state? Because that's what I need you to be in for this coaching session. And it's kind of a unique and interesting way to start a session and frame it up, but it puts them in state. And you can teach your client instant state change like that. Why don't we just flick over and have a look at how crucial that is when you're going to an important meeting or sitting in an interview or walking down the corridor and you run into a boss who's kind of a bully. You need to be able to change state instantly. You can't call your coach. You can't, go through the routines that I'm going to show you elsewhere. You have to change state instantly. So what are you going to do? Crack a joke, smile, laugh, breathe deeply. I have a friend who likes to raise their hands in the air. They just stick their hands in the air and look at the ceiling, and it changes their state instantly. And that is going to look a bit funny if somebody sees you doing it. So this sort of methodology is used in public speaking all the time. So when you're standing in front of the microphone and feeling terribly nervous, public speakers are taught to anchor. So that's work you have to do before the event, touch a spot and fire off a state that's peace. Or they breathe deeply, or they imagine the audience naked. Now what does that do? if you imagine the audience naked, it immediately puts you in a position of power. You're clothed, they're not. It immediately makes the situation funny, and as a result of that, it helps change your state, so you get back to kind of reframing, oh, wait a minute, I'm in charge, I'm the expert here. Let's flip that over. Now, the last slide I want to talk about here about instant state management is just to say to you that Australia's biathletes, which are guys that cross-country ski and then shoot at targets either in the daytime or the nighttime, run a heart rate of about 200 beats per minute, and they have to drop it to less than 140 and have absolutely steady hands, and they have to do that within about 20 seconds. You imagine dropping from 200 BP to 140 and from running and shaking to absolute calm in 20 seconds. That is a feat. But at the AIS in Canberra, they teach them how to do that through a process of visualization. So whilst 20 seconds isn't instant, I think you might agree that it's pretty impressive to be able to move your state in 20 seconds. And that's all you need if you're going to be doing public speaking under pressure. All right. State management model number 2. State management model is called the 3 inputs model. If you want to read more about this, there is a handout which will give you 12 things you can do to change 3 elements of your life for you and your client, which is one of the handouts that we're going to give you. This basically relies on an environmental form of management to build and change your state. So it's going to require kind of longer term work with the client. It's rarely instant. I originally learned this from Dr. Ian Snape. As I mentioned, he's my coach, but he learned it from John Grinder originally, who's one of the founders of NLP. So let's just have a look at the model overleaf, and it's made up of 3 arms. You can help a client alter their neurology, the way they think, the responses of the autonomic nervous system, brain perception, stereotyping, psychology, patterns of thinking. Or you can help them change their physiology, so how are they standing, how are they sitting, how are they breathing, what are they eating, how are they sleeping, what's their energy level, what's their state. Or you can help them change their biochemistry, which is basically the state of their blood chemistry, the hormones that are running through their system, the neurotoxins, any drugs they're on, any medications they're taking, and so on. So biochemistry, physiology, neurology. So what we're going to do is try and pull one of these 3 levers and assist our client to move. So let's have a look at biochemistry. Neurochemicals and neurotoxins, hormones, all the things running around in the bloodstream, these are not something coaches are used to really having to deal with, because we're not trained medical technicians, right? So I'm not asking you to go get a degree on biochemistry, but the biochemical makeup in the blood is made up of, or is a response to, our environment, the activity that we're undertaking, the rest that we have, what we eat, the medicines that we have, and so on and so on. So just remember that every medicine has a cognitive performance effect, and every medicine changes mood. For example, they've just done a long-term study on ibuprofen and found that ibuprofen radically increases the incidence of irritability, anger, and depression when taken long-term. Now, long-term means for more than 3 months. Now, I had a kid who was taking ibuprofen every day, and she was taking it to deal with headaches. And guess what started happening to her over the course of 3 to 4 months? Her blood chemistry was being profoundly changed. So ibuprofen's great to get rid of one headache, but for God's sake, don't make a lifestyle out of it. Sleep affects memory. It reduces the stress hormones. So after about 8 hours of sleep, with at least 3 cycles of REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, your brain is able to strip out the cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine out of the fluids floating around in the brain. So it takes about 8 hours to do that. And if you've had a highly stressful day and you only get 5 hours sleep, guess what happens? All the baseline levels go up and you wake up stressed. You know how this works. And you go to work stressed and you get more stressed, and then you get home and you have less sleep, and it's a self-defeating cycle. So coaches can help people sleep better. Coaches can work with them on their sleep, how it's set up, how they're thinking about sleep, whether they think it's effective or not. Dietary effects. So I'm not here to say you need to learn about diet and nutrition and weight loss and all this sort of stuff, but just get your client to play a simple experiment. Just get your client to do one thing, anything. Eat eggs today, and then in 3 hours' time, monitor how you feel. What is your state like? And then tomorrow, eat white bread. And then 3 hours later, monitor your state. How do you feel? And then. This does two things. The first thing is it gets the client to become aware of what they're eating, and secondly, it gets them aware of the effect food has on them. And remember, blood sugar level changes, whilst instant, yes, within the first 30 minutes of having food, take 3 hours to roll out and have effect in the system. So that's why I'm saying watch what you do 2 to 3 hours away from what you eat. So the key there is monitoring. All right, neurology. So we, of all people on the planet, know that what our clients think about affects them. It affects their state, it affects everything. If they're bitter and angry and resentful, that's going to create one kind of state. If they're happy, grateful, thankful, joyful, that's going to create quite a different state. And I guess I want to pause here for a second and say, very often coaching is outcomes oriented, it's goals focused, but what happens is the client ends up trying harder to get to that goal. So imagine a straight line along the bottom of a page where we're coaching them and we're saying, what outcome do you want for this session? What outcome do you want for these 6 sessions, and how, and in your life, and where would you like to be? And then they basically apply the only tool that they can think of, which is to work harder. My suggestion to you is that state profoundly affects A, their ability to think about outcomes, and B, their ability to work harder. If they're in a bad state, a low energy state, an angry state, everything that we coach them through is going to be poorly affected. If we can coach them in a high performance state, they can see different outcomes. They can think about their outcomes differently. They can access activity and behavior better than in a lower state. And that's why I think as we begin to talk to them about neurology and what they think, the heuristics, their self-talk, what meaning they're placing on events, the stereotypes, the models they have, we're not doing that for fun, and we're not doing that just because we want them to become more self-aware, although that's important. We want them to do that so that they can say, oh, my self-talk changes my state, and if I have better self-talk, I have better belief in self, better self-esteem, that gives me a better outcome. I can aim for better things. I believe in myself more. So we ask, where do you place your attention? That's a classic coaching question, and that works on the neurology of their state. I don't know if you're familiar with Philip Zimbardo's study on time paradox, but if you haven't, have a bit of a Google of that and find out that there are 3 or 4 different ways that people look at time. There are people that look back and look fondly. There are people that look back and regret. There are people that live in the now and feel great. There are people that live in the now and feel terrible. There are people that look forward to the future with hope and expectation. There are people who have an eternal view and a hopeful view, and there are other people. So the very way that a person thinks about and experiences time changes their state. And this is really important when you're working with senior executives who always feel time pressured and are always focusing on the short-term immediate future and outcomes. So just to get them to become aware of the way that they look at time actually alters, according to Zimbardo, the longevity, their state, their happiness, the degree of contentment that they have in life, their ability to hold relationships together, and on and on and on the outcomes go. I don't know if any of you have seen the study about the taste of wine. So they did a study of wine tasting, and they put it in a styrofoam cup and a plastic cup and a kind of a glass goblet and then this crystal goblet, and they poured the same wine into these 4 containers and got the people to, and didn't tell them about the wine, and got them to taste it. And these were expert wine tasters who made a living out of tasting wine. And every single time they gave the crystal goblet or the glass the highest degree of, whatever way that they measure wine's goodness. And that's funny because the wine didn't change. It was the context in which the wine was served that changed. And that's kind of a metaphor that I like to use with clients about how life is experienced. The frame they put around it changes their very experience and taste of it. All right, so let's have a look at physiology then. Powering through the slides, doing very, very well. So physiology is something that probably we're all really familiar with, and I'm not going to labour it, but it's the correct operation of the nervous system, the autonomic system, the operation of the lymphatic system, making sure that they're walking 30 minutes a day. I don't know if you came across Dr. John Arden's studies about the most effective and potent pain relief therapies and drugs on the market, and the most powerful ways of relieving depression. But John Arden's work discovered that 30 minutes a day of exercise, his presentation on YouTube is called 23 and a half hours. 30 minutes a day was by far the most effective treatment for pain and depression, by far, outstripped all the others. And you just think, 30 minutes a day, what is that? It's just physiology. It's physiological alteration of state. So I don't know if you do breathing exercises with your clients, or posture, or walking, or facial expressions in the way that they change their mood, but I want you to have a think about physiology if you haven't already put it into your practice. All right, so let's look at the third model. The third model is what I'm going to call the circle of excellence. This again is a technique and technology designed by John Grinder in the US, and one for which he doesn't necessarily take ownership. He says that he learned from others, but I'm going to credit him for it. That's where I learned it. So this last model is, I think, the most effective and most powerful model, but it does take time. It takes time to work with your client on it. So we mentioned this, of course, at the seminar in Sydney, and you can read an article about how to walk with a client called John all the way through. If you go to Coaching World magazine, the ICF Global magazine, you'll see an article I wrote for them called Coaching High Performance Individuals, or High Performance Coaching Individuals, or something like that, which walks you through this very process. So the first idea is that we can give our client a tool, a technique, a circle that they can step into and alter their state instantly, but it takes a bit of work to build that state. Again, there's a handout at the end, and I'm going to get Brenda to show you how to download that, and you can use that, and it'll walk you through the 12-step process that we use to do this. But anyway, we're going to help them access a circle of excellence. Now, I've done this with doctors, senior nursing staff, a lawyer, a builder, a public speaker who makes a lot of money out of their living, an author, the motorbike rider that I was telling you about. Now, the circle of excellence is not going to help him on his motorbike. He needs to step into it before he jumps on that machine and then goes out, and he needed a don't fall off the machine state to listen to his signals. So let's have a look at the role of rituals. So in much the same way as you might establish an anchor for a client, and many of you who've done NLP would be familiar with how to anchor things, sights, sounds, smells become anchored to memories, and you smell that perfume, and it takes you back to the 5th grade and Mrs. French and the class and the girl that you liked and all the rest of it. So already anchoring is quite a natural process. Well, this is similar. What we're going to do is give them a circle, and it doesn't have to stay that way. I have one client who anchored it to her brooch and another who anchored it to her keys and so forth, so it doesn't have to be a circle. But you get them to build an imaginary circle on the ground, and you get them to walk through some rituals that will anchor state to that activity. So according to the research of Dr. Francesca Gino, rituals performed before high-pressure tasks, such as the one I'm about to show you, increase attention, increase execution, emotional stability, confidence, and markedly reduce anxiety. So in a way, I kind of don't care if it's a placebo effect or not. What I care is that it works, and I care that the client believes that the process works. And the lawyer was a little skeptical at first, but once he tried it, he was turned around. So here's how it works. Let's have a look at the process of stepping into the circle. Number one, we get the client to imagine there's a circle on the ground. Number two, we get them to step into that circle, and we ask them to think about a state where they were undertaking high performance. So I did this yesterday with the owner of a large mechanical automotive business, and he stepped in and he thought of surfing. He loves surfing. So he thought of that, and I just said, think of the experience, upload the state that you have in that experience, all its sights and sounds and smells and wonder and gorgeousness, and just be in that circle. Yep, got it. Great. So you break state, step out of the circle, talk to him about lunch, how's your wife, what's going on, look out the window. Step back into the circle. It's got to be imaginary, by the way, because they have to be able to take it with them. Go back in. Can you upload the state? If yes, fantastic. We'll move on. If no, return to step one. Step two, upload another state on top of the state. So this is state stacking, and you can do it 2 and 3 and 4 and 10 times until they have this amazing state that they want. Just a note, remember we're building a generic high-performance state. The state you need to sleep well, high-performance sleep, is not the same as high-performance sex, which is not the same as high-performance public speaking, which is not the same as high-performance driving. So just be aware that we're going to build this generic state, but then after that you can replicate it into all different areas and all different ways and all different models and flavors and sizes. So we load these different states in, and we get them to step out and step in, make sure they can load it. Yes, it works, good. And then finally get them to load in anything else they think is going to be useful. Now this sounds a little crazy, but I don't care if they are loading in a suit of armor, if they want to become a superhero, if they're going to load in, telekinesis. It does not matter. What matters is that they're loading the resources they need for high performance. So you just say, do whatever you need, add whatever you need. Visual cues, metaphors, anything, and in it all goes. After they've done that, we have to see if they can take it with them. We have to see if they can pick up that circle and move into another room and fire it off. And then the final trick is, can they do it without the circle? Can they go outside and just step into that state? Because if they can, you've just given them something incredible. Now, tomorrow morning, I have a confrontation with my boss, and I'm going to make sure that circle is in front of my boss's door, and I'm going to step into it, and then I'm going to open his door, and then I'm going to be a different person when I go to confront him. I'm going to have access to a whole different set of behaviors than I had before, which is, pardon me, exactly what happened to that client. One of the lawyers was, oddly enough, a bit nervous about when he went to court. So, and not a bit nervous, he was so nervous he was throwing up. So, and this is a senior lawyer, so he needs a better state to manage than that. All right, let's have a look at perhaps not my favourite tennis player, Maria Sharapova, but do you recognise the process that we've just been through? This process, developed by John Grinder but copied out of high-performance athletic behaviour, was modelled on the kind of rituals that people go through before they play ball. So Maria Sharapova's routine is this. I'll just walk you through it. Number one, turn your back on your opponent and focus on the racket strings to mentally regroup. I just go watch her play next time, watch her do this. Number two, take the balls from the same corner of the court every time and make sure that the ball boy always delivers them to that corner of the court. Number three, walk to the baseline and bounce on the spot. Number four, brush the hair away from the opposite side of your face. Number five, bounce the ball twice, slowly. Number six, serve. It's just a classic. She goes through that routine all the time. It's a ritual. But what is it doing? It's firing off a high-performance state for her and maintaining that state so that she can, in her mind at least, maintain a winning attitude. And you can imagine trying to run somebody through that kind of performance before speaking to the media. It's just not going to work. So what we do is we condense it down to a circle and a state. And trust me, sports psychologists spend a lot of time and get paid a lot of money teaching their people how to do that. And you and I can also do that and hopefully be paid a lot of money, so that's good. Just want to clear something up before we take questions. So I want to challenge you to start typing questions now into the question box and ask you so that we can interact with one another. But before we do that, I just want to clarify something that became quite confusing for me when I started playing with state. So we can just flick that over there, Murray. We're not trying to teach our clients to be in peak state all the time. One of my clients is a managing director of a company, and he had a peak experience. We'd done a coaching series. He'd gone home. He'd applied some of what he had learned, and he had this really amazing state when he got home. Incredible state, like almost out of my body experience. The problem is he then got it in his head that that was the state that I wanted him to get into anytime we talked about state, and it isn't. You would have heard me previously say the state for talking and the state for driving and the state for sleeping are not the same thing. So we are not saying our clients have to be in a high performance state all the time. But I would encourage you to think about what is the appropriate state for sleeping and how can you adopt it before you sleep? What is the appropriate state for eating and how can you adopt it before you eat, and so on and so on and so on. So we're just trying to get optimal state for the activity, and I don't think human beings were designed to be kind of handstanding the whole time. All right, so I'm not sure which comes next, Murray. Is it any questions or is it a direction? Okay, so any questions there, Brenda?
No questions yet, Rob. I think you're covering everything that people have asked.
What's needed?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure that you can see the text. There is a question right now from Michael. Michael's a theologist and a priest, just wondering if you have any thoughts on religious rituals, somewhat like the circle that you have described, particularly if the coachee has such rituals or practices already in place. Would you be working with them?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, Michael, great question. Religious rituals are exactly the same. They will help an individual fire off a state. This doesn't, what I'm about to say doesn't just apply to a religious context, but every context. All we need to do as coaching practitioners is ask the question, is that the state that they want? Is that the state? For example, if I go to a dinner party with 6 people and we start talking about religion or the church, some people there will have good, it will fire off good memories for them and it will fire off a good state. For other people, quite a negative state. So all we need to do is just make sure what is it that they've associated into that state. And if it's negative, we can obviously work with that individual. So say, for example, they've come to your parish from another parish and they've had a very bad experience. We can work them through that and say, you know what, this is not that, we are not them, everything they said is not all right. What state do you need to be in to experience your time here well and with joy and whatever other things are needed? But you're absolutely right. Sporting rituals, family rituals, gatherings, religious rituals and so forth all run into the same limbic system and I'm going to say subneocortex areas. They're not all the same, but the cerebellum and all the programming in the brainstem will be the same no matter what rituals we're firing off. Great question, thank you.
Rob, Edwina has asked, how would you use this work in organisations that are training developing managers to coach their staff for high performance?
I do this work all the time in organisations, and I would blend state management in with whatever other material we're doing. So if we are doing a conflict or problem solving or strategic thinking or team performance, whatever area that we've been brought in to work with them, I would simply say to them, what do you think the state we need to get the best outcomes from this session would be? Can anyone remember the last time they really enjoyed a training session or really enjoyed a coaching session or whatever the topic is? Yes, someone will put up their hand, and then I'll say, great, so do you want to step up and let's have a talk? And then I'll demonstrate the circle process, and I'll say, if you want high performance in learning, you need to adopt a high performance learning state. So let's build one of those for you to enjoy this session now. And then once having demonstrated that, the team become very curious because they say, well, what about a high performance conflict state? What about a high performance problem solving state? What about? And I did this series of training sessions with a law firm around very much the same question. And by the end of it, the barrister said to me, I'm going to have to get a recliner couch put in the corner of my office because to obtain a high performance state for our afternoon meetings, I'm going to have a nap. And I just thought that was wonderful revelation for him to realise and give permission to self to get into a higher performing state by going to sleep for the afternoon. Only 10, 20 minutes. But the answer to your question basically is I start with someone and I demonstrate with that individual, and then once I get a team to understand it and we work with each individual in the team, now we've got something to show the organisation. So hopefully that's someone high up in the organisation. Someone in the C-suite, someone with authority, someone who can really begin to demonstrate culture change through state management. If we can just flip to the next slide while we're waiting for any other questions. I want to just again point out and get Brenda to let you know as she tells me any questions. Just check out the handouts that are available on the platform. One of them is the 12 things you can do to change your state, which is based on the 3 inputs model from Ian Snape, and one of them is the process to walk people through the circles of excellence from John Grinder, and those there are available. Brenda?
Question from Carol. Do you think that the work of Timothy Galway in 1974 still stacks up in terms of the inner game of the I and me concept?
Haven't read the book, am not familiar with that, so can I just ask back, how was that work applied? Did it go to rapport with self between conscious and unconscious? Let's just turn over one more slide while we're waiting for the answer there.
Carol says come back saying yes, Rob.
Great. Well, then it's highly relevant because rapport with self is central to how to manage state, and very often the 3% conscious, and I say this as a guilty party, very often the 3% is at war with the 97% and fighting and saying, I don't like it, I don't like what you're doing to me. And that's not a very good place. So having conversations with self, I highly recommend Shad Helmstedter's book, What to Say When You're Talking to Yourself. He does get a little scripty in terms of, if you are struggling with smoking, deal with this. If you are talking to weight loss, deal with that. But I think the principles in Helmstedter's book are really good for beginning a conversation with self. But yes, definitely rapport with self is central.
There's a question from Karen, thinking about the 3 inputs model. Yeah. How do you suggest working with that as a coach?
So what I do with the client is show them the diagram and then say, here are the 3 inputs. What do you think goes in? And they start coming up with ideas, this, that, something else. And then I begin to draw out a whole list of things that go into those 3 areas. And it might be, they'll come up with their own list. I want them to own it. So I'll put in a few things here and there. And then I'll say, of those 3 things, which one do you think is the lever most effective to pull on to get you state change right now? And they'll invariably point to something. They'll say physiology for sure. Okay, and on this list that you've drawn up of all these tons of things that you want to do, what's the highest payoff? Number one issue here. Oh, it's sleep. Great. So that now becomes our topic for coaching. Or I then put it back to them and say, is that the outcome that you'd like, is the outcome that you'd like to work on? And they'd say, oh, I want to get better sleep so that I can manage my state better. Great. So do you want that to be the way that we talk about and work through now? Yes. Great. So off we go. I do that knowing we're going to be playing with the physiological input to the state model. And the thing to do for me is to check in when he's played with sleep, did that change your state or not? Because your intuition might not have been right. So let's just turn over to the last slide. They're happy to continue to take questions. Just want to make one. Sorry, go.
I don't think there is a last slide, Rob. I think there is a last slide.
Well, you keep flicking over to it and then back from it.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that one. Yeah.
It looked like...
Oh, your screen. Okay. I would love to follow you and interact with you and have you follow me on Twitter. So there's my Twitter handle there. If you have any queries or questions, please go to fraserholmes.com and feel free to write to me. I'm at robert@fraserholmes.com. The large kind of panel thing there that I've got in front of you is a screenshot of a Facebook group called NeuroCoach Yourself. I started writing a book about neurocoaching and the subject of my PhD work, and it got so boring I nearly fell asleep, and I thought this is not going to be of any use to coaches. So I was working with a fiction author at the time who suggested that I try and write the material as a fiction novel, and I don't claim to be a very good fiction novelist, so I'm writing a business allegory of the likes of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team or Richest Man in Babylon and so forth. This is the group, and I would absolutely love for you to participate in the group. I'm not selling the book. I'm writing a chapter at a time. I'm up to chapter 7. I post a chapter a week and people interact with me about the characters and where they want to see it go and what didn't make sense and so on and so on. I would just love for you to join this group. It's open and you are absolutely welcome. So without further ado, any other questions before we need to close off?
We've got a minute, I think, Rob. There's a question from Jerome. Should we, as high-performance coaches, niche in a specific area or work with everyone across the board?
Well, that is a good question, and it really depends on who you feel most comfortable to work with. So high performance is an area that helps me coach people with personal development. So personal development is my niche, and neurocoaching is my passion, and performance is really what happens and what changes. You could definitely niche into high performance. I think one of the things I've run into and one of the problems I've had is that a CEO doesn't take a racing motorcycle testimonial very seriously, and vice versa. So people in the sporting field want to hear sporting stories, and people in the business field want to hear business stories. So all I can do is encourage you to get passionate about your niche and then use high-performance ideas in that niche. I hope that makes sense. Murray.
All right, if there are no more questions, we might wrap it up. Rob, I thought that was fantastic. As I said, I did have the privilege of seeing Rob and Ian Snape speaking at the Sydney ICF event on Tuesday. And it was wonderful, and we've covered a whole lot of new area just then, which really got me stimulated, and I'll find myself following up a lot of those areas you said, and I'll certainly be joining your Facebook group. I think the models are fantastic, and as coaches, we're always looking for models, and I think these are really quite interesting ones around so logical the stages of state, and I particularly like the idea of picking the appropriate state for the activity you're trying to adopt. So, Rob, on behalf of everyone that's listening, thank you very much. It was very, very good. What I'd like to do now is give you the second password. So, Brenda, could we just stop the recording?